Well, tonight we're focusing on the criminal justice system in the U.S. and on the case of an Alabama man who has spent 30 years on death row. Rocky Meyers is a black man who was convicted in 1994 of killing his white neighbor, Ludie Mae Tucker. An almost all-white jury found him guilty of murder despite a lack of physical evidence and recommended a sentence of life in prison. And despite that, the judge in the case imposed a death sentence against Meyers, who at a young age was diagnosed with an intellectual disability. Alabama is one of 27 U.S. states where the death penalty is legal, and it was the first to execute someone earlier this year. Siobhan Silke has some background on the case.
Rocky Meyers is 62 years old. He spent 30 of those years on death row.
It doesn't matter what I pray for or pray about. When I lay down at nighttime, I thank the Lord for getting me through one day.
He was convicted of the 1991 murder of an elderly white neighbour in his city of Decatur in the southern U.S. state of Alabama, a conviction advocates say was a miscarriage of justice. Meyers had no history of violence. There was no physical evidence linking him to the crime. Witnesses changed their stories multiple times. One vital witness later recanted his testimony, saying he had come under pressure from police. Meyers' current legal team say he had poor representation in court.
He is a black man in a small white town in Alabama, and he walked into that courtroom with an attorney who represented the Ku Klux Klan, and he had 11 white jurors and only one black juror.
The jury found Meyers guilty and recommended a life sentence. The judge ignored this recommendation, sentencing him to death. It's a punishment that's disproportionately applied to black defendants, the poor and the most vulnerable, including people with an intellectual disability, which Meyers has. His chance to appeal was squandered when his then lawyer abandoned the case without informing Meyers. Rocky Meyers cannot now appeal his conviction in court, but Alabama Governor Kay Ivey has the power to grant him clemency.
And to discuss this a little bit more, joining us now are Kacey Keeton, the lawyer representing Rocky Meyers, and Miriam Bankston, part of the legal investigative team on the case. Thanks for being with us here on France 24. First of all, Kacey, where does this case stand at the moment? Has a date been set for execution? And if not, could that happen at any moment?
Currently, there has not been a date set for an execution, although previously, back in 2015, there was a date, but that was stayed. And where we are at this point is, at any moment, the Attorney General of Alabama could ask for a date from the Alabama Supreme Court. And
you're trying to get public support to urge the government to, or the governor to give clemency?
Absolutely. In Alabama, the only way to have success in a case like this after you are out of your appeals is through the governor of Alabama and seeking clemency.
Miriam, there was no clear evidence, as we heard in that report, as I understand, that connected Mr. Meyers to the crime, except for a video recorder belonging to the victim that Mr. Meyers said he found in the street. What is the nature of the evidence in this case, and what led this jury to convict?
As far as evidence in this case, again, there's no DNA evidence. Some of the witnesses that said that it was Mr. Meyers that sold the VCR later admitted that they lied, recanted their statements. And as far as what led this jury to convict, it's actually interesting because there were several jurors who did not think that he was guilty. And they made a deal with each other in order to spare his life because they feared what would happen if there was a mistrial. So they decided to vote him guilty. So that the compromise with that they would give him a life sentence.
Did he make any statements to police that may have implicated him in this case at all?
No, he has maintained his innocence.
Maintained his innocence. Kacey, the judge in this case imposed a death sentence, even though that didn't follow the recommendation for the jury. I know that different states have different rules on this, but how does it work in Alabama?
At the time of the trial, there were 3 states actually that allowed what's called judicial override. So the jury simply makes a recommendation, but the judge has the ability to override that. At the time, Alabama allowed override, and Florida and Delaware were the other 2 states. But Alabama really stood alone in not having any standards for the judge to make any kind of written findings. Simply had the ability to override it.
Given that one of the jurors has come forward to say she regretted the decision, isn't that a basis for an appeal in this case?
It would be lovely if that were true. Unfortunately, because of what happened in Mr. Myers' second tier of appeals, which is the state post-conviction, where his attorney that had volunteered to represent him abandoned him, he missed a deadline, and that foreclosed any ability to raise claims in the federal courts.
Let's talk more about the bigger picture here when it comes to the criminal justice system in the U.S. You know, the Innocence Project estimates that 190 people have been executed in the U.S. since 1973, and they were later exonerated, some of them by DNA evidence. The vast majority of those folks were Black or Latino. So, Miriam, if Rocky Meyers were white, do you think he'd even be in jail right now?
Absolutely not. I think that race has played a part from the beginning of this case. I think it led to his arrest. I think it impacted his interactions with the police. I think the fact that he walked into that courtroom with an attorney that represented the Ku Klux Klan and then went before a jury of 11 white people and one Black person absolutely impacted his trial.
How did his intellectual disability play into this case?
His intellectual disability is going to play a part in his interactions from the moment that he's arrested. It's going to impact his interactions with police, with his attorney, his ability to understand, his ability to assist in his own representation, and then the fact that he missed his appeals, and it goes on and on.
Kacey, a legal question for you. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that executing an intellectually disabled person amounts to cruel and unusual punishment. So how is it that Rocky Meyers is still on death row?
And again, this goes back exactly to the attorney that dropped Mr. Myers' appeals in that middle tier of appeals, which meant that in the federal court, the Atkins issue could not be raised. Previously, it was not raised because two attorneys failed to do any investigative work, which would have uncovered the fact that Mr. Myers' school records demonstrated that he had been diagnosed with an intellectual disability at the age of 11.
This has been such a long time, Kacey, that you've been representing him. And you wrote at one point your client wanted to give up the fight for clemency because so much time has passed. He's tired of fighting. How does he feel now?
You know, the one thing that he has never wavered in is that Rocky Meyers wants to live. He has never not wanted to live. But initially, when he was denied by the U.S. Supreme Court, the things that impacted him were just this weariness of being consistently told no, but also an issue of dignity because he did not want to beg for his life.
Why have you been fighting for him for so long?
I think that everybody deserves this kind of fight. Rocky Meyers is a really special human being. He is a friend at this point, but he is also the son of two people. He is the sibling to 9 individuals. He is the father of 4 children. He has multiple grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He is a human being, and he deserves the opportunity to live like a human being and be treated like a human being.
I'd like to ask both of you this question. What is your ultimate hope in this case? Miriam, you first.
My ultimate hope is that Rocky Meyers goes home one day to his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. And I think we first have to accomplish that through clemency, at least getting him life without parole and then going from there. But my dream is that Rocky is free one day.
Are you optimistic that could happen?
I have to be doing this line of work, yes.
And you, Kacey, what's your hope?
I agree with Miriam. Real justice for Rocky Meyers would be him at home. For right now, as his daughter Karen has said, life without parole would be enough because he would be able to continue those beautiful relationships that he has with his family and with his dear friends.
I understand there's a petition circulating, Amnesty International. How many people have signed it?
I think at our last count, we had almost 900,000 people that had signed that petition.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you coming in to discuss this case with us. Kacey Keeton, lawyer representing Rocky Meyers, and Miriam Bankston, part of the legal team investigating this case. We appreciate your time and joining us here on France 24.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks to you both. That's it for now. Stay tuned for more world news still to come here on France 24.